Sarah Martinez had driven 47 miles through the Texas heat just to find a decent shooting range. The old pickup truck coughed and wheezed as she pulled into the gravel parking lot of Thunder Creek Gun Range, dust clouds swirling behind her worn tires. She sat for a moment, staring at the weathered wooden building that looked like it had seen better decades. The faded sign creaked in the hot wind, and she could hear the distant pop-pop-pop of gunfire from behind the structure. Edo, 32, Sarah had been shooting since she was 8 years old. Her grandfather had taught her on his ranch, starting with tin cans lined up on fence posts and working up to more challenging targets. Those summer afternoons felt like a lifetime ago now. After her divorce 6 months earlier, she had packed up her few belongings and moved to this small Texas town for a fresh start. The job at the local veterinary clinic paid enough to cover her modest apartment and basic needs, but it left her feeling isolated and lonely. Shooting had always been her escape, her way of finding peace in a chaotic world. There was something almost meditative about the focus required, the way everything else faded away except for her breathing, her stance, and the target ahead. She had brought her grandfather's old rifle and her personal handgun, both carefully maintained and legally registered. All she wanted was a quiet place to practice and maybe feel connected to happier memories. The parking lot held a dozen pickup trucks, most of them newer and shinier than hers. She grabbed her gun case and range bag from the passenger seat, checking twice that everything was properly secured. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed groups of men gathered around tailgates, sharing stories and examining each other's firearms. Their conversation stopped as she passed, and she felt their eyes following her movement. The front office smelled like gun oil and old leather. Behind the counter sat a heavy-set man with graying hair and suspicious eyes. His name tag read Buck, and he looked her up and down before speaking. The walls were covered with hunting trophies, competition ribbons, and photos of men holding rifles and dead deer. A few women appeared in the pictures, but they were clearly outnumbered 20-1. Sarah approached the counter with what she hoped was confidence. She explained that she was new in town and looking for a place to practice shooting. Buck's response was immediate and dismissive. He told her that Thunder Creek was a serious range for serious shooters, not a place for beginners or weekend hobbyists. When she assured him that she had been shooting for over 20 years, he laughed and said that plinking at tin cans on Daddy's farm didn't count as real experience. The other customers in the office had stopped their conversations to listen. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. She explained her background, mentioned her grandfather's ranch, and offered to show her certifications. Buck waved her off, saying they didn't need any accidents or insurance claims from inexperienced shooters. He suggested she try the indoor range in the next town over, claiming it was more suitable for her skill level. Sarah stood there for a moment, processing the rejection. She had driven nearly an hour to get here, and the indoor range Buck mentioned was even farther away. More importantly, she recognized the tone in his voice and the smirks on the other customers' faces. This wasn't really about her experience or safety concerns. This was about her being a woman in what they considered their exclusive boys' club. She thanked Buck politely and turned to leave, but stopped when she heard one of the men behind her make a crude comment about women not belonging at shooting ranges. Another voice chimed in, saying that guns were too dangerous for delicate hands. The laughter that followed made her stomach turn, but it also sparked something else inside her. Instead of leaving quietly, Sarah turned back to face the room. She asked Buck directly if there was any rule or law preventing her from using the range. When he admitted there wasn't, she requested to speak with the owner. Buck claimed he was speaking for the owner, who shared his concerns about liability and safety. The conversation grew more heated as other customers joined in, making comments about political correctness and how women were trying to take over everything that men had built. Sarah realized that arguing further would be pointless. These men had already made up their minds about her before she had even spoken. She gathered her dignity, wished them a good day, and walked out of the building. Sitting in her truck in the parking lot, Sarah felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and determination. She had faced discrimination before, but it never got easier. Part of her wanted to drive home and forget about the whole experience. But another part of her, the part that remembered her grandfather's patient teaching and encouraging words, refused to be defeated so easily. She pulled out her phone and started researching other shooting ranges within driving distance. Most were even farther away, and she wondered if she would face the same reception at those places too. As she scrolled through reviews and websites, she noticed something interesting about Thunder Creek Gun Range. They hosted monthly shooting competitions, and the winners' names were displayed on a large leaderboard visible from the parking lot. Looking up at that leaderboard now, Sarah saw dozens of names stretching back several years. Every single name belonged to a man. The current month's leader was someone called Tex Wilson, with an impressive score that had apparently stood unchallenged for 3 weeks. Other names she recognized from inside the office were scattered throughout the rankings. An idea began forming in her mind, wild and probably foolish, but appealing in its boldness. She knew she was a good shot, probably better than she had let. On to Buck. Her grandfather hadn't just taught her to plink at tin cans. He had trained her in precision shooting, long-distance accuracy, and competitive techniques that most casual shooters never learned. Maybe it was time to show Thunder Creek Gun Range exactly what kind of shooter they had just turned away. Sarah started her truck and began planning her return, this time with a very different strategy in mind. Sarah spent the next 3 days researching everything she could about Thunder Creek Gun Range and their monthly competitions. She discovered that the contests had been running for over 15 years, with the same core group of men dominating the leaderboards year after year. The format was straightforward. Competitors paid an entry fee and shot at targets from various distances, with points awarded based on accuracy and grouping. The current record holder, Tex Wilson, had scored 487 points out of a possible 500, a score that had stood for nearly 2 years. What interested Sarah most was the range's policy regarding competition entry. According to their website, the contests were open to anyone with proper credentials and safety certifications. There was no mention of gender restrictions or experience requirements beyond basic firearm safety knowledge. She printed out the application forms and began gathering the documentation she would need. Her evenings were spent in careful preparation. Sarah cleaned and calibrated her grandfather's rifle, a custom-built precision instrument that most people mistook for an ordinary hunting rifle. Her grandfather had been a competitive shooter in his younger days, before family responsibilities and ranch work had consumed his time. He had taught her that shooting was 90% mental preparation and only 10% physical skill. She also researched each of the regular competitors, studying their scores and shooting patterns from previous months. Tex Wilson was clearly the alpha of the group, but his scores showed occasional inconsistency under pressure. Buck himself was a mediocre shooter who rarely placed in the top 10, which explained some of his defensive attitude. Several other names appeared regularly in the top 5, suggesting a tight-knit group of serious competitors who probably knew each other well. Sarah practiced at a small private range an hour away, paying extra for extended sessions and premium ammunition. She wanted to be certain of her capabilities before making any public claims. Her groups were consistently tight at 100 yards, and she could maintain accuracy even at longer distances that most casual shooters avoided. More importantly, she discovered that her skills had actually improved during the months since her divorce. The stress and focus required for precision shooting had become a form of therapy. On Thursday evening, she called Thunder Creek to inquire about the upcoming competition scheduled for Saturday. A different voice answered the phone, someone younger who sounded more professional than Buck. When Sarah asked about entry requirements, he explained the process without any of the hostility she had experienced earlier. The entry fee was $50, and competitors needed to provide proof of firearm safety certification and valid identification. The young man, who introduced himself as Jake, mentioned that they typically had between 15 and 20 competitors each month. When Sarah asked about female participants, there was a pause before Jake admitted that they had never actually had a woman enter the competitions, though there was nothing in the rules preventing it. He sounded genuinely curious about her interest and encouraged her to come out and participate. Sarah decided not to mention her previous encounter with Buck, suspecting that Jake might be the owner's son or a part-time employee who wasn't present. During her first visit, she confirmed the competition details and promised to arrive early for registration. After hanging up, she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded her of her first hunting trip with her grandfather. Friday night brought little sleep as Sarah ran through mental preparations and visualized the competition scenarios. She had competed before, back in high school and college, but never in an environment where she would face open hostility from other participants. Her grandfather had always told her that the biggest enemy of a good shooter was their own mind, and she worked to quiet the doubts and distractions that could affect her performance. She selected her ammunition carefully, choosing match grade rounds that she had tested extensively. Her rifle was cleaned and checked one final time, and she packed extra supplies in case of equipment issues. The weather forecast called for light winds and clear skies, ideal conditions for precision shooting. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp coolness that would burn off by mid-morning. Sarah dressed in practical clothing that would allow for comfortable shooting positions, avoiding anything that might be seen as either too feminine or too masculine. She wanted her shooting to speak for itself without any additional distractions. The drive to Thunder Creek felt longer than usual, her mind cycling through possible scenarios and outcomes. She had no illusions about being welcomed with open arms, but she hoped that the formal structure of a competition might provide some protection from the worst behavior she had encountered earlier. As she pulled into the parking lot, Sarah noticed significantly more vehicles than during her previous visit. Several men were setting up equipment and discussing strategy near the competition sign-up table. The leaderboard loomed over the scene, Tex Wilson's name prominently displayed at the top with his record-breaking score. Jake turned out to be exactly what she had imagined, a college-aged young man with an easy smile and genuine enthusiasm for shooting sports. He welcomed her warmly and helped her complete the registration paperwork without any drama. When she handed over her safety certifications, he was impressed by her credentials and mentioned that they rarely saw such extensive documentation from casual participants. The trouble started when Buck emerged from the office and spotted Sarah at the registration table. His face darkened immediately and he approached with the same hostile energy she remembered from their first encounter. Jake looked confused as Buck demanded to know what Sarah was doing there, clearly not recognizing her right to participate in the competition. Other competitors began gathering around the developing confrontation, their conversations stopping as they sensed drama brewing. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor as Buck questioned her qualifications and suggested that she might be more comfortable watching from the sidelines. Jake tried to mediate, explaining that Sarah had properly registered and met all requirements. The situation escalated when Tex Wilson himself approached the group. He was exactly what Sarah had expected, tall, confident, and accustomed to being the center of attention. When Buck explained the situation, Tex looked Sarah up and down with barely concealed amusement. He suggested that perhaps they could create a separate category for beginners, or maybe Sarah would prefer to compete at a shorter distance to make things more manageable for her. Sarah felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest, but she had learned to channel that energy into focus rather than confrontation. She politely declined Tex's suggestions and stated that she would compete in the standard division alongside everyone else. The gathered men exchanged glances that mixed skepticism with anticipation, as if they were looking forward to watching her fail publicly. As the competitors began moving toward the firing line, Sarah overheard several comments about the entertainment value of having a woman attempt their serious competition. Someone mentioned taking bets on whether she would even hit the target, while another voice suggested that her presence might actually be good for a few laughs. Sarah checked her equipment one final time and took her assigned position on the firing line. Around her, the other competitors were settling into their routines, some of them shooting glances in her direction while others pointedly ignored her presence. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her grandfather's voice telling her to let everything else fade away except the target ahead. The competition was about to begin, and Sarah was ready to show Thunder Creek Gun Range what they had dismissed so casually just a week earlier. The competition began with targets at 50 yards, considered an easy warm-up distance by most of the regular participants. Sarah watched as Jake explained the scoring system to a couple of newcomers, noting that each competitor would fire 5 shots at each distance with points awarded based on proximity to the bullseye. Perfect center shots earned 10 points, with decreasing values for outer rings. Tex Wilson shot first, establishing his dominance early with 4 shots in the inner ring and 1 just outside for a total of 47 points. The other competitors nodded appreciatively, and someone called out that Tex was on pace for another record-breaking performance. Buck managed a respectable 39 points, clearly pleased with his showing despite being outshot by several others. When Sarah's turn came, the casual conversations around the firing line quieted noticeably. She approached her shooting position methodically, adjusting her stance and checking her sight alignment with the careful precision her grandfather had drilled into her years earlier. The rifle felt familiar and comfortable in her hands, like reconnecting with an old friend. Her first shot produced a perfect 10, the bullet hole appearing dead center in the bullseye. A few murmurs rippled through the watching crowd, but most seemed to attribute it to beginner's luck. Her second shot landed in the same spot, followed by a third that was so close it nearly enlarged the existing hole. By her fourth shot, which also found the center ring, the conversations had stopped entirely. Sarah's fifth and final shot at 50 yards completed a nearly perfect group, all 5 bullets clustered within an inch of dead center. Her score of 50 points was the maximum possible, something that hadn't been achieved at the opening distance in over 3 years of competitions. The silence that followed her performance was thick with surprise and confusion. Jake announced her perfect score with obvious excitement, but the response from other competitors was mixed. Some offered grudging congratulations while others exchanged skeptical glances. Tex Wilson studied the target through binoculars, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. Buck muttered something about lucky shots and beginner's luck. That couldn't possibly continue. The second round moved to 100 yards, where wind conditions and increased distance typically separated the serious shooters from casual participants. The targets looked impossibly small from the firing line, and several competitors were already making adjustments to their scopes and discussing wind drift calculations. Sarah took her time setting up for the longer distance, making minor adjustments to her scope and accounting for the slight crosswind that had developed. She had spent countless hours practicing at this distance, and her grandfather's custom rifle had been built specifically for precision work at 100 yards and beyond. The other competitors watched her preparations with increasing attention. Her first shot at the longer distance struck just outside the center ring, earning 9 points. The watching crowd seemed to exhale collectively, as if confirming their expectations that her earlier performance had been a fluke. But Sarah's second shot returned to the bullseye, followed by 3 more that created another tight grouping in the highest scoring area. With 48 points at 100 yards, Sarah had maintained near-perfect accuracy, while most other competitors dropped significantly in their scoring. Tex Wilson managed 42 points, still impressive but clearly struggling with the increased challenge. Buck's performance deteriorated to 31 points, and his frustration was becoming visible to everyone present. The whispered conversations around the firing line had changed in tone. Instead of dismissive comments about beginner's luck, Sarah began hearing speculation about her background and training. Someone suggested she might have military experience, while another voice wondered if she was some kind of professional instructor using a fake identity. The third distance was set at 200 yards, a range that many casual shooters found extremely challenging. The targets appeared as tiny dots from the firing line, and atmospheric conditions became critical factors in accuracy. This was where competitions were typically won or lost, as the technical demands separated expert marksmen from merely good shooters. Sarah felt completely in her element as she prepared for the long-distance shots. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot accurately at much greater distances, often taking game at 300 yards or more. The custom rifle in her hands had been designed for exactly this type of precision work, with a barrel and trigger system that most of her competitors had probably never experienced. Her first shot at 200 yards produced another 10-point bullseye, causing an audible gasp from someone in the watching crowd. Jake checked the scoring through spotting scopes twice before confirming the perfect shot. The other competitors had stopped their own preparations to watch Sarah's performance, creating an atmosphere of tension and anticipation. 4 more shots followed in quick succession, each one finding the target's center with mechanical precision. When the final score was announced as another perfect 50 points, the silence was complete. No one had ever shot a perfect score at 200 yards in the history of Thunder Creek's competitions, and Sarah had now done it twice in the same day. Tex Wilson was clearly rattled as he approached his shooting position. His first shot missed the target entirely, something that hadn't happened to him in years of competition. He recovered with 4 decent shots for 36 points, but his composure was visibly shaken. Other competitors were struggling even more dramatically, with several scoring below 20 points at the challenging distance. Buck's performance at 200 yards was particularly poor, managing only 18 points with shots scattered widely around the target. His face was red with embarrassment and anger, and Sarah could hear him complaining loudly about equipment problems and unfavorable wind conditions. As they prepared to move to the final distance of 300 yards, the atmosphere around the competition had completely changed. What had begun as entertainment at Sarah's expected expense had transformed into something resembling awe and confusion. The regular competitors were dealing with the psychological pressure of being outshot by someone they had dismissed as an amateur. Sarah maintained her calm focus, but she could feel the weight of attention and expectation building around her performance. She had 2 more distances to complete, and her current scores had already shattered every assumption her competitors had made about her abilities. The question now was whether she could maintain her precision under the increasing pressure of an audience that had stopped seeing her as a joke and started viewing her as a serious threat to their established order. Jake approached her between rounds with obvious curiosity and respect. He mentioned that her performance was already historic for their range and asked about her background and training. Sarah provided only minimal details, explaining that she had learned to shoot from her grandfather and had maintained her skills over the years. The competition was far from over, but Sarah had already proven her point about being dismissed too quickly. Now the challenge was to maintain her focus and continue shooting at the level that had shocked everyone present. The final distances would determine whether her perfect start could be sustained and whether she could actually challenge Tex Wilson's long-standing record. The 300-yard line represented the ultimate test of marksmanship at Thunder Creek Gun Range. From this distance, the targets appeared no larger than postage stamps, and even experienced shooters often struggled to hit them consistently. Atmospheric conditions, minute variations in ammunition, and the slightest tremor in a shooter's hands could send bullets far from their intended mark. Sarah took her position on the firing line with the same methodical approach she had maintained throughout the competition. Around her, the other competitors were making significant adjustments to their equipment, compensating for bullet drop and wind drift that became critical factors at extended range. Several had switched to different ammunition or modified their shooting positions to account for the increased difficulty. The pressure of expectation was becoming palpable. Word of her perfect scores had spread beyond the immediate competitors, and additional spectators had gathered to witness what was developing into a historic performance. Some had driven from nearby towns after hearing about the mystery woman who was dominating Thunder Creek's supposedly exclusive competition. Tex Wilson was visibly struggling with the psychological impact of being outshot so dramatically. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious anxiety, and he was spending far more time than usual preparing for each shot. His supporters were offering encouragement and advice, but their voices carried undertones of concern and disbelief. Buck's hostility had evolved into something approaching panic. He was complaining loudly about irregularities in the competition, suggesting that Sarah's equipment should be inspected or that she might be using illegal modifications. Jake politely but firmly dismissed these objections, pointing out that all firearms had been checked during registration and found to comply with competition rules. Sarah blocked out the surrounding drama and focused on the technical demands of the 300-yard shot. Her grandfather had taught her that long-distance shooting was more about patience and consistency than raw skill. The rifle needed to be held the same way for every shot, breathing controlled to the exact same rhythm, and trigger pressure applied with mechanical precision. Her first shot at 300 yards struck the outer edge of the bullseye for 9 points. A collective intake of breath from the watching crowd suggested that many had expected another perfect 10. Sarah analyzed the shot, recognizing a slight error in her wind compensation, and made a minor adjustment to her aim point. The second shot found dead center for 10 points, followed by 3 more that clustered tightly in the highest scoring ring. Her total of 48 points at 300 yards was extraordinary by any standard, representing shooting that most competitors could only dream of achieving. The scattered applause that followed was genuine and respectful, even from those who had initially opposed her participation. Tex Wilson's attempt at 300 yards was clearly affected by the pressure of Sarah's performance. His shots were erratic and unfocused, resulting in a disappointing 27 points that effectively ended any chance he had of defending his championship. His supporters tried to console him, but the psychological damage was evident to everyone present. Other competitors fared even worse at the challenging distance. Buck managed only 15 points, with 2 shots missing the target entirely. Several others scored below 20 points, making Sarah's near-perfect performance appear even more impressive by comparison. As they prepared for the final distance of 400 yards, the atmosphere around the competition had shifted completely. What had begun as casual entertainment had become a serious athletic event, with Sarah's performance challenging assumptions not just about her abilities, but about the nature of shooting sports themselves. The 400-yard targets were barely visible from the firing line, appearing as tiny dots that seemed to waver in the heat shimmer rising from the Texas plains. This was the distance that separated true marksmen from merely good shooters, where minute errors in technique or equipment were magnified into significant misses. Sarah approached the final challenge with the same calm focus she had maintained throughout the day. Her grandfather had trained her at even greater distances, often engaging targets at 500 yards or more during their hunting expeditions. The principles remained the same regardless of distance: consistent form, controlled breathing, and absolute focus on the target. The watching crowd had grown significantly, with over 50 people now gathered around the firing line. Some were taking photographs while others were recording videos of what they clearly recognized as an exceptional performance. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and respect. Her first shot at 400 yards produced an 8-point hit in the outer ring of the bullseye. The crowd responded with appreciation for what was still an excellent shot at such an extreme distance. Sarah made a slight adjustment for the increased wind that was developing in the late morning heat. The second shot climbed to 9 points, followed by a perfect 10 that drew spontaneous applause from the watching spectators. Her fourth shot also found the center ring for another 10 points, leaving her needing only a decent final shot to secure what was already a record-breaking performance. Sarah's final shot at 400 yards struck just outside the bullseye for 8 points, giving her a total of 45 points at the most challenging distance. While not perfect, it represented shooting that exceeded anything previously recorded at Thunder Creek Gun Range. When Jake announced her final total score of 491 points out of a possible 500, the silence that followed was profound. She had not only broken Tex Wilson's long-standing record, but had shattered it by 4 points while shooting against competitors who had considered her an amateur just hours earlier. The applause that finally erupted was genuine and sustained, coming not just from spectators but from many of the competitors who had initially opposed her participation. There was a quality of recognition in the response, an acknowledgement that they had witnessed something truly exceptional. Tex Wilson was among the first to approach Sarah with congratulations, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging respect and professional admiration. He admitted that he had never seen shooting of such consistent quality, especially from someone competing for the first time at their range. Other competitors followed with similar acknowledgments, many asking about her training and background. Buck remained notably absent from the congratulations, instead hovering near the registration table with Jake and complaining about various aspects of the competition. His objections were ignored by everyone present, including Jake, who was clearly excited about the historic nature of Sarah's performance. As the crowd began to disperse and competitors started packing their equipment, Sarah felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. She had proven her point more dramatically than she had ever imagined possible, But the victory felt different than she had expected. Instead of vindication against those who had dismissed her, she felt a genuine connection to the sport and the community of serious shooters who had ultimately welcomed her achievement. The leaderboard would need to be updated with her record-breaking score, but more importantly, the assumptions and attitudes that had driven her initial rejection would need to be reconsidered. Sarah had not just won a shooting competition, she had challenged and changed the culture of Thunder Creek Gun Range through the simple act of demonstrating her abilities. The celebration that followed Sarah's record-breaking performance was unlike anything Thunder Creek Gun Range had seen in its 15-year history. Competitors who had been skeptical or hostile just hours earlier were now gathered around her, asking detailed questions about her technique and training. The shooting community, Sarah realized, respected excellence above all else, and her demonstration had earned their grudging but genuine admiration. Jake was practically bouncing with excitement as he prepared to update the leaderboard. He explained that Sarah's score of 491 points didn't just break the existing record, it obliterated it by a margin that would likely stand for years to come. He asked if she would be willing to participate in an interview for the range's newsletter and website, wanting to document the historic achievement properly. Several competitors offered to buy Sarah lunch at the local diner, eager to continue discussions about shooting techniques and equipment. Tex Wilson, despite his obvious disappointment at losing his long-held record, was among the most enthusiastic about learning from her performance. He admitted that he had never seen such consistent accuracy across all distances, and asked if she would consider giving informal lessons or demonstrations. The transformation in attitudes was remarkable, but not universal. Buck remained sullen and argumentative, continuing to suggest that there must have been some irregularity in the competition. He questioned whether Sarah's rifle modifications were legal and whether her ammunition met competition standards. His objections were politely but firmly dismissed by Jake and the other competitors, who had witnessed everything firsthand. As Sarah packed her equipment, she reflected on the day's events. She had come to Thunder Creek seeking nothing more than a place to practice shooting, but had ended up challenging and changing the entire culture of the facility. The victory felt satisfying, but more complex than simple revenge against those who had dismissed her. The drive home gave Sarah time to process the magnitude of what had occurred. Her phone buzzed constantly with friend requests and messages from people who had heard about her performance. Word was spreading quickly through the local shooting community, and her achievement was already being discussed on social media and shooting forums. Over the following days, Sarah found herself something of a local celebrity. The veterinary clinic, where she worked, was receiving calls from people asking about her shooting background. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story about the newcomer who had conquered Thunder Creek's male-dominated shooting culture. Several shooting clubs from neighboring towns reached out with invitations to compete in their events. Jake called to inform her that her name was now prominently displayed at the top of Thunder Creek's leaderboard, and that they had received more inquiries about future competitions in the past week than in the previous 6 months combined. He mentioned that several women had called asking about participating in upcoming events, inspired by Sarah's success. The most significant change, however, was in her relationship with Thunder Creek Gun Range itself. Jake offered her a membership, with waived fees, and invited her to help design future competition formats. He acknowledged that her achievement had exposed limitations in their previous approach, and expressed genuine interest in making the range more welcoming to diverse participants. When Sarah returned to the range the following Saturday for casual practice, the reception was dramatically different from her first visit. Competitors who were present recognized her immediately and approached with respect and curiosity. Several asked for advice on technique, and a few requested to observe her shooting process to learn from her methods. Buck was noticeably absent from the front office, and Jake explained that there had been discussions about his attitude and behavior toward potential new members. The range's ownership had decided that creating a welcoming environment was more important than maintaining old attitudes and traditions that excluded qualified shooters. Sarah established a regular practice schedule at Thunder Creek, usually arriving early in the morning when the range was less crowded. She enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere and the opportunity to maintain her skills without the pressure of competition. Several other shooters began timing their visits to coincide with hers, hoping to learn through observation and occasional conversation. 3 weeks after her record-breaking performance, Sarah was approached by a representative from a major ammunition manufacturer who had heard about her achievement. They offered her a sponsorship deal that would provide free ammunition and equipment in exchange for using their products in competitions and providing feedback on new developments. The offer surprised Sarah, who had never considered shooting as anything more than a personal hobby and stress relief activity. She had competed in high school and college, but had never pursued it as a serious sport or potential career path. The sponsorship would allow her to compete more frequently without the significant expense of premium ammunition and equipment. More importantly, the manufacturer's representative mentioned their interest in promoting women's participation in competitive shooting sports. They felt that Sarah's achievement at Thunder Creek represented exactly the kind of story that could inspire other women to become involved in shooting competitions. They offered to help promote her achievements and connect her with other female competitors across the region. Sarah found herself considering opportunities she had never imagined. Several ranges in neighboring states had invited her to compete in their annual championships, offering to cover travel expenses and entry fees. A shooting magazine wanted to publish an article about her training methods and competitive philosophy. The attention was flattering, but also overwhelming for someone who had simply been looking for a place to practice shooting in peace. Sarah realized that her spontaneous decision to prove herself at Thunder Creek had opened doors to a world of competitive shooting that she hadn't even known existed. As she considered these opportunities, Sarah thought often about her grandfather and the patient hours he had spent teaching her to shoot. He had instilled in her not just technical skills, but a philosophy of shooting that emphasized precision, consistency, and respect for the sport. His influence had shaped not just her abilities, but her approach to challenges and setbacks. The discrimination she had faced at Thunder Creek had been painful and frustrating, but it had also revealed strengths and capabilities that might have remained dormant otherwise. Her response to that rejection had not only vindicated her personally, but had opened opportunities for other women who might face similar barriers in the future. Sarah decided to accept the sponsorship offer and several of the competition invitations, viewing them as opportunities to continue challenging assumptions about women in shooting sports. She would always remember Thunder Creek Gun Range as the place where her abilities had been questioned and then dramatically proven, launching her into a world of competitive shooting she had never expected to enter. 6 months after her record-breaking performance at Thunder Creek Gun Range, Sarah Martinez had become a recognized figure in competitive shooting circles across 3 states. Her sponsorship with the ammunition manufacturer had led to additional endorsements and opportunities that transformed shooting from a hobby into a legitimate career path. More importantly, her success had sparked a broader conversation about inclusion and opportunity in shooting sports. The changes at Thunder Creek were immediately visible to anyone who visited the range. The parking lot now regularly contained vehicles belonging to female shooters, and the monthly competitions consistently included 4 to 6 women among the participants. Jake had instituted formal policies against discrimination and harassment, creating an environment where all qualified shooters felt welcome. Buck had been quietly asked to find other employment after several incidents of inappropriate behavior toward female visitors. His replacement was a retired military instructor who actively encouraged participation from shooters of all backgrounds and experience levels. The transformation in atmosphere was dramatic and permanent. Sarah's name remained at the top of the Leaderboard, but it was no longer alone. 3 other women had posted scores that would have been competitive with previous male-dominated competitions. The overall quality of shooting at Thunder Creek had improved significantly, as the expanded participant pool brought new techniques and perspectives to the range. The ripple effects of Sarah's achievement extended far beyond Thunder Creek Gun Range. Her story had been featured in several national shooting magazines and had become a case study in how individual excellence could challenge institutional barriers. Shooting ranges across the country began examining their own cultures and policies, recognizing that excluding qualified participants based on gender was both morally wrong and economically foolish. Sarah had competed in 12 major tournaments since her Thunder Creek debut, placing in the top 3 in 10 of them and winning 4 outright. Her consistent performance had earned respect from competitors who initially viewed her success as an anomaly. She had proven that her record-breaking day was not a fluke, but rather a demonstration of skills developed through years of dedicated practice and superior training. The sponsorship opportunities had multiplied beyond her wildest expectations. In addition to ammunition and equipment endorsements, Sarah had been invited to serve as a spokesperson for women's participation in shooting sports. She appeared at trade shows and competitions across the region, sharing her story and encouraging other women to pursue their interest in shooting despite potential obstacles. One of her most rewarding developments was the establishment of a monthly women's shooting clinic at Thunder Creek Gun Range. Sarah volunteered her time to provide instruction and encouragement to newcomers, helping them develop both technical skills and the confidence necessary to compete in mixed-gender events. The clinic had grown from 3 participants in its first month to over 20 regular attendees. Jake had been promoted to range manager, and he credited Sarah's achievement with revitalizing the entire facility. Membership had increased by 40%, and the monthly competitions now drew participants from a much wider geographic area. The range had been forced to expand its facilities and add additional competition dates to accommodate the increased interest. Sarah's relationship with Tex Wilson had evolved into genuine friendship and mutual respect. After his initial shock at being dethroned, he had embraced the opportunity to learn from her techniques and had actually improved his own performance significantly. He often served as Sarah's spotter during practice sessions, and they had developed an effective partnership that benefited both their competitive shooting. The local veterinary clinic where Sarah worked had become an unofficial shrine to her achievements, with newspaper clippings and competition photos displayed prominently in the waiting room. Her employer had granted her flexible scheduling to accommodate her competition travel, recognizing the positive publicity her success brought to the practice. Most significantly, Sarah had discovered a sense of purpose and community that had been missing from her life since her divorce. The shooting sports world had provided her with challenges, friendships, and opportunities for personal growth that extended far beyond marksmanship. She had found her place in a community that valued excellence and respected achievement, regardless of its source. The transformation was perhaps most visible during Thunder Creek's annual championship, held 1 year after Sarah's initial record-breaking performance. The event drew competitors from 5 states and included the largest field of female participants in the competition's history. Sarah successfully defended her title with another record-breaking performance, but the real victory was the presence of dozens of women who had been inspired by her example. During the award ceremony, Jake presented Sarah with a special recognition for her impact on the shooting sports community. He acknowledged that her courage in facing discrimination and proving her abilities had changed not just Thunder Creek Gun Range, but the broader culture of competitive shooting in their region. Sarah's acceptance speech was brief but heartfelt. She thanked her grandfather for teaching her that excellence speaks louder than prejudice, and she encouraged other women to pursue their passions despite obstacles they might encounter. She emphasized that her achievement was not about defeating men in competition, but about earning the right to compete on equal terms. As she looked out at the audience, Sarah saw faces that reflected the transformation she had helped create. Young women sat alongside experienced male competitors, all united by their shared passion for precision shooting. The barriers that had seemed so insurmountable just 1 year earlier had been dismantled through the simple act of demonstrating competence and earning respect. The leaderboard at Thunder Creek Gun Range would always show Sarah Martinez at the top with her record score of 491 points, but her true legacy was measured in the opportunities created for others who had previously been excluded. She had proven that discrimination could be overcome through excellence, and that challenging unjust barriers often opened doors for entire communities of people who had been denied access. Sarah continued to compete and win, but she had already achieved something more important than any individual championship. She had transformed a culture, created opportunities for others, and proven that courage and skill could overcome even the most entrenched prejudices. Her bullet had indeed blown out more than just the range's leaderboard. It had shattered assumptions and opened minds in ways that would benefit generations of future shooters.